Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on Thursday, the 25th of January. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined in the studio this evening by our good friend William Duguid, the activist and uh, a writer, activist with Perth and Kinross Yes Hub. Apologies, William, but thank you for sticking with us in the late start this evening.
It's good to be here and happy Burns Night.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for for reminding us. So I'll start with our Ukraine update, and today is day 701. A Russian military transport plane has crashed in the border region of Belgorod, according to Russia's defense ministry, killing all 74 people on board. The ministry said the aircraft was carrying 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war who were to be swapped. The ministry added that on board the Ilyushin 11 II-76 were also 6 crew and 3 Russian servicemen. Apologies for my garbled delivery of that sentence there. Ukraine has neither confirmed nor denied that it hit the plane, but said Moscow had created a deliberate threat to the life and safety of its POWs by failing to warn Kyiv to deconflict the airspace before the swap. The statement followed a now retracted Ukrainia Pravda report, which claimed that the military had shot down the jet. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky called for full clarity over the crash. Zelensky said in his nightly video broadcast, "It is clear that the Russians are playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners, the feelings of their loved ones, and the emotions of our society." A drone attack on Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa injured one person and started a fire, the regional governor said. UK Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said its allies needed to step up the amount of military aid given to Ukraine. The Finance Minister of Germany has said it can't keep up Ukraine's defence capabilities on its own in the long term and that others will need to increase bilateral contributions. Ukraine's foreign ministry has called out US TV network HBO for casting a Serbian actor it says backs the Russian invasion of Ukraine in the next season of hit show The White Lotus. Milos Bikovic was given Russian citizenship in 2021 and was personally honoured by Vladimir Putin for his contribution to Russian arts. William, that was a fairly relatively short Ukraine update. Was there anything there that you'd like to comment on?
Well, the big story is obviously the military plane crash that was carrying some Ukrainian prisoners of war, and it looks like I would say it's quite likely, although the report on it was withdrawn, that it was the Ukrainian military that downed the plane and that it was therefore a mistake, and that won't be helping morale, one wouldn't think. And there appears to be an attempt to blame Russia on this for quote not deconflicting, well, not warning sufficiently to allow the airspace to be quote deconflicted, um, and also Zelensky asking for clarity and saying that Russia is playing with the lives of the Ukrainians. All of these are valid things to say, but it just looks like one of those mistakes that happens in wartime, and it will, um, you know, affect to some extent the morale, I think, of the Ukrainian forces. The other thing to note is Grant Shapps and Germany saying that there needs to be more support and not just from, in each case, us. So the continuing support for Ukraine in the way it needs to be supported to carry on the war is going to be a problem as 2024 goes on, I would think. And that, I think, will be one to watch. Those are the only two things that really stood out.
Okay, thank you, William. I believe it's also President Zelensky's birthday today, so birthday wishes
Ah,
to him.
fair enough.
So on to the Israel and Gaza conflict. The US and UK are planning to impose new sanctions on leaders of the Iran-aligned Houthi group, which will include at least 4 senior figures being subject to asset freezes and travel bans. The targeting of ships linked to Israel will continue until aid reaches the Palestinian people in Gaza, Yemen's Houthis leader Abdel Malik al-Houthi said today in a televised speech. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken today renewed calls for Israel to protect civilians after a deadly strike on a UN shelter in Gaza that brought rare US condemnation. The Health Ministry said that the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis has run out of food, anaesthetics, and painkillers. Qatar has accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of obstructing mediation efforts in the Gaza war and prioritising his career after a leaked recording allegedly captured him calling the Gulf state problematic. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson, Majid al-Ansari, said, "We are appalled by the alleged remarks." Israel's far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has accused Qatar, a key mediator in efforts to free its hostages, of being largely responsible for the 7th of October Hamas attack. Thomas White, the Director of Affairs in Gaza for the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, or the UNRWA, said today that the situation in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza, underscores a consistent failure to uphold international humanitarian law. He said the persistent attacks on civilian sites were utterly unacceptable and must stop immediately. Israel's military says it is looking into allegations that its forces opened fire on crowds of Palestinians queuing for aid in northern Gaza City, reports Al Jazeera. At least 20 people were killed and 150 injured in the attack at the Kuwait roundabout, according to Gaza's health ministry. An Israeli government spokesperson said they expect the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, to throw out the spurious genocide allegations on Friday. Lord Cameron, the UK Foreign Secretary, who is in the Middle East for talks with Israeli leaders and Qatari mediators, has called for an end to the Israeli bottlenecks preventing aid reaching Gaza and backed an immediate pause in the fighting. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said the humanitarian situation in Gaza is appalling, with a quarter of the population grappling with catastrophic levels of food insecurity, as he renewed the UN's plea for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Israeli strikes have killed at least 50 Palestinians in Khan Yunis in the past 24 hours. Al Jazeera reported that at least 3 people, including 2 children, had been killed by Israeli shelling of the Al-Sattar al-Gharbi area of Khan Yunis. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society transported a number of injured people to hospital on Thursday morning after Israeli forces targeted an apartment building in Rafah, southern Gaza. At least 1 person was killed in the strike, which happened at dawn in the Tal al-Sultan neighbourhood, reported Al Jazeera. William, same question again. Was there anything in today's Israeli Gaza update that you'd like to elaborate on?
Well, there's a fair bit to unpack in various areas. The first thing is that there's obviously disquiet, certainly in Antony Blinken's mind, and I think rightly so, but still playing softball with Israel about the civilians who seem to be under attack almost every day. We're still reeling from the report on ITV just the other night of some Palestinians carrying a white flag being shot at and one of them killed. Now we've got reports that people queuing for aid in Khan Yunis have been subjected to an attack and 20 of those killed. And Israel's protestations that they are amongst the most careful military forces with regard to civilian casualties just rings, to my mind, increasingly hollow. But nobody, certainly not Antony Blinken, will just come out and say that, because we still seem to be very much cheerleading on the side, maybe with a few misgivings, possibly about later on being seen to support war crimes. It's a tricky position to be in. Oh, and in that light, of course, there is the ICJ decision tomorrow. And Israel is sounding fairly confident that the allegations will be thrown out as spurious. I think that is a possibility. I think they have their supporters amongst the judges in the ICJ. I very much hope that a compelling case was made by South Africa, compelling enough to get the judgment, because I think if it comes out that Israel is not regarded as guilty uh, of what's alleged, then where is justice? Where is international justice? And where is the humanitarian situation in any war anywhere? So I think that's the thing I'd really be looking out for tomorrow, and I'm very much hoping that goes the right way. Those stand out, but there are so many other things because this is a complex and very, very messy war.
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, William. Forgive me. And yeah, it's like Ukraine; it's not going to end soon. So the next item is the UK COVID-19 inquiry today. Heard from First Minister Humza Yousaf and from Liz Lloyd, the head of staff to former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. In her evidence, Liz Lloyd gave evidence about her role as a special advisor, or a SPAD, and her WhatsApp exchanges with Nicola Sturgeon and contemporaneous notes from meetings. The inquiry has heard that Nicola Sturgeon had deleted any WhatsApp message which she said was in line with Scottish Government data retention policy. Nicola Sturgeon since said that the inquiry does have messages relating to the pandemic, although they were not retained on her device. She stated on social media, "To be clear, I conducted the COVID response through formal processes from my office in St Andrew's House, not through WhatsApp or any other informal messaging platform." Asked why Sturgeon deleted messages, she did not. Liz Lloyd replied that in the exchanges, she was the official and Nicola Sturgeon would have assumed that Miss Lloyd would take care of it. In one WhatsApp exchange with Liz Lloyd, Nicola Sturgeon said, "Watching Boris Johnson's UK press briefing was fucking excruciating," adding, "He is a fucking clown." First Minister Humza Yousaf began his evidence by apologising to the COVID-19 families for the delegation of any WhatsApp messages. Mr Yousaf said that all decisions and any salient information relating to release of WhatsApp messages. Forgive me, so not the deletion of any WhatsApp messages, but the release of WhatsApp messages. Forgive me, the voice in my ear saying that I said delegation. It's the deletion of any WhatsApp messages. Mr Yousaf said that all decisions and any salient information relating to decision making had been transferred to the official record, and that deleting messages after 30 days was in line with the Scottish Government data retention policy. And he has ordered a full independent review into the way Scottish Government manages WhatsApp and other unofficial messaging technologies. On the failure to hand over WhatsApp messages, Mr Yousaf said, "There's no excuse for it, we should have done better." William, I didn't do this item justice in my garbled reading of it, but it was interesting. I looked at The Guardian just before it came online, and the headline said Nicola Sturgeon regarded Boris Johnson as a clown. There was no mention of the F word, but then the first line of the article did say that the disgraced, let's face it, the disgraced former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is a fucking clown. Nicola Sturgeon apparently also said that the Prime Minister was utterly incompetent. This kind of reminded me of that tweet, if you remember, from the civil service back in the day, at the time in May 2020, where someone working in the civil service said, "Arrogant and offensive, can you imagine having to work with these truth twisters?" What's your take on today's COVID inquiry?
Well, I think Nicola Sturgeon will come under some fire for what she said about Boris Johnson. But at the same time, a lot of people will totally agree with her opinion of Boris Johnson. So it might actually do her more good than harm. But there will be the usual nonsense going on. Slightly disconcerted today to see that the talk about WhatsApp messaging goes on and on and on. And Humza Yousaf has apologised unreservedly now and said we should have done better. I think probably they still did better than their counterparts in England, but that really doesn't matter. It looks as if some government business may have been carried on, or at least as near as damn it carried on WhatsApp. And that isn't right. It doesn't really matter if it's subsequently transferred to the record or not. It shouldn't be happening. I don't have a problem with the deletion of messages, bearing in mind that they can always be recovered by WhatsApp, or indeed they may be recovered from the person on the other side of the discussion. It was government policy to delete WhatsApp messages. I thought Jason Leach yesterday had and sorry, I've got a voice in my ear now. It was government policy both here and in Westminster that WhatsApp messages should be deleted, and the record should be the corporate record, the proper government account of what went on. That has been supplied, and it just seems to me that we're sort of dancing around in a pinhead now, and the press is having the opportunity to bring up a lot of irrelevant stuff. I would much rather be hearing the meat of the inquiry about the decisions that were taken and whether or not the same decisions would be taken were we in the same situation in future, because that's what really worries me. About 4 years on from the outbreak of COVID, I don't think we're any better prepared for a pandemic coming in. It could be tomorrow, it could be in 10 years, it could be in 50 years. And that is a scandal. We must get out of the inquiry some idea of how we would deal with future pandemics.
Thank you, William. I think it's important that we always keep in mind the Scottish COVID bereaved group. The voice in our ear, just for the benefit of the listeners, was telling us that the problem with WhatsApp messages is that they can't really be backed up easily in a corporate system, I guess, because of the scale. But there was also Humza Yousaf was questioned today. He brought up the fact that there was no contribution to any of the COVID meetings by the Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, which begs the question, what was he doing during the pandemic? The current First Minister, Humza Yousaf, wondered why Jack even bothered to attend. Says that he sat in meetings and never said a word. So what is Alistair Jack for? Do you have any clue, maybe, William?
Well, Alistair Jack is there to do as much damage to the Scottish government as possible. That is his job, and by saying nothing, he probably achieved that. One of the threads that's coming out of this inquiry is the poor relationship between the UK government and not just Scotland but Wales, the devolved governments in general. We have the UK government taking decisions without involving the devolved governments. We have agents of the UK government, Alistair Jack being an example, who are no help at all, as much use as a chocolate fireguard. And we also have a press that's trying to pin the blame for this poor relationship on the devolved governments. But the item that's in common is the Westminster government. And this is no way to run a union. And people in Scotland and Wales will very shortly have more and more evidence of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've got to move on, but is it maybe just before we do, is it worth making the point that neither Rishi Sunak nor Boris Johnson, and I believe Alistair Jack, none of those have released any WhatsApp messages at all to the COVID inquiry so far. Is that right?
It may well be right, but I do wish we could stop talking about WhatsApp messages.
Yeah.
There is so much else that needs to be discussed that, as far as I can see, isn't being discussed, at least in the mainstream news reports, and we need to learn.
Yes. Okay, so the next item is the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS, has said that the next UK government faces some of the toughest tax and spending choices for generations, as it will be forced to grapple with the impact of weak growth and high debt interest payments. The IFS has warned that Jeremy Hunt's much predicted budget tax cuts risk being reversed or paid for by spending cuts, and urged the Conservative and Labour parties to level up with voters before polling day. Launching the IFS's work programme for an expected autumn general election, the think tank said the victorious party would have a thorny inheritance. The IFS report said that living standards have endured an unprecedentedly long stagnation, with taxes at record levels for the UK. Public services are showing visible signs of strain and are in many cases performing less well than they were in 2010. Falling inflation and lower market interest rates have improved the short-term outlook, but the IFS said the Chancellor needed to spell out what taxes would rise in the future or specify which services currently supplied by the state would be axed. The IFS said the challenges facing the next government were made more acute because a slow-growing economy would generate less in tax, and interest payments on the UK's 2.7 trillion national debt would account for 9% of revenues on average across the next Parliament. Both the Conservatives and Labour have promised to reduce debt as a share of national income, which stands at just under 98%. But the IFS said this would be more difficult than at any time since the 1950s and would involve trade-offs. These trade-offs included a large cut to public investment over the rest of the decade, which would still fail even if Labour's planned spending on its Green Prosperity Plan was taken into account. Tough funding constraints with concentration of spending on priority areas such as the NHS, schools and defence, implying cuts to £20 billion in other unprotected departments. Plans by both parties to cut net migration to the UK had implications for the social care and higher education sectors, and neither party had talked about the higher care costs or the higher tuition fees for domestic students that would result from cutting numbers. There's progress towards achieving net zero had involved picking most of the low-hanging fruit, and the next steps, such as reducing emissions from buildings, would involve short-term costs on businesses and consumers. Then spending on disability benefits was rising fast and required urgent attention, but previous efforts to rein in spending had struggled to achieve the stated objectives, while any general promises to cut spending would need to be accompanied by specific details as to who would lose out. The SNP economy spokesperson, Drew Hendry MP, said, "Public services are already under pressure as a result of Brexit, soaring UK inflation and years of Westminster austerity cuts. The SNP's firm opposition to cuts will be a clear dividing line between the SNP and the Tory Labour Westminster establishment at the general election." William, is it of interest or is it of note that the IFS have grouped both Labour and the Conservative parties together, because no matter which does form the next government, we're probably going to get the same outcomes?
Well, if you listen to Rachel Reeves, she's certainly not looking to rock the boat in terms of what we would term financial orthodoxy. Certainly, the financial orthodoxy that the likes of the Institute for Fiscal Studies embraces. And it's very much a zero-sum game for them. It's like the UK economy is a household, and that there is a limitation on the budgeting. And of course, you can't go wild, but it's not the only point of view in town. And the likes of Richard Murphy, for example, is a long-term critic of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and has written about it quite trenchantly in his blog today. And basically, they're making the assumption, and I'm really mostly quoting Richard Murphy here because he can do his sums and I'm not very good at them. But he's saying the assumption that they're making is that we must stabilize the debt and that everything else must be sacrificed to that goal. And that would be personal living standards and just public services in general. He points out that much of the debt is personal savings and asks if there's a problem with people wanting to save with the government. He's asking, are interest rates a given, or does the government have any control over that? And again, to a certain extent they do, although it has been handed over to the Bank of England. He also notes that if rates fall, then a lot of the problems disappear. And so I think probably the government has more choices than the IFS would tend to suggest. They are right in saying that any incoming party needs to be honest about their taxing and spending choices. And I'm pretty sure right now I would make different taxing and spending choices, certainly from the Conservatives and possibly from Labour as well. That's a valid point. But I wouldn't want to say there's nothing that can be done, because otherwise we're in for a spiral of decline. I think there are things that can be done that might be quite bold, but we need to reinvigorate the economy from where we are. And then the tax revenue will come in to cover that, and maybe we just need to push the boat out a bit more. That might be naive, but I'll just cling to Richard Murphy's boat for the time being, if that's okay.
Yes, that's okay. Thank you, William. So the next item is David Mundell, the Conservative MP for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale, has said David Cameron breached proper process when he appointed Michelle Mone to the House of Lords in 2015. David Mundell, who was the Scotland Secretary at the time, said Lord Cameron appointed Mone without Downing Street consulting the Government Scotland Office, which is standard practice before awarding peerages to Scots. Cameron and Westminster Tories wanted to reward Mone after she publicly backed the No campaign in the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. David Mundell said some Scottish business people were unhappy with Mone's peerage, but he did not have an opportunity to discuss it until after Cameron had confirmed the appointment. Mundell said the peerage was a fait accompli by the time we heard about it. He said that he was unhappy that the proper process was not followed and that the Scotland Office was not asked to provide any background or input. He said he was not at all surprised to find that Scottish businesses were very unhappy about the appointment. Mr Mundell said that he told Downing Street that Scottish business figures were unhappy because they did not consider Michelle Mone to be a substantial businesswoman. Shortly before giving her a peerage in August 2015, Cameron made Mone his entrepreneurship star, and she was appointed to lead a review for Ian Duncan Smith, then the Work and Pensions Minister, on supporting people in deprived areas to set up businesses. The government's announcement described her as a leading entrepreneur and businesswoman. Later the same month, Cameron made her a Conservative Life Beer in 2015 Dissolution Honours List, the official citation describing her as a leading entrepreneur. The peerage, carrying the title Baroness Mone of Mayfair, was controversial at the time and the subject of outspoken criticism by some Scottish business people. Douglas Anderson, the managing director of the Glasgow-based plant hire company Gap Group, gave his views in strong terms in a letter to Cameron after reading initial reports that a peerage was being considered. Anderson pointed out that published financial accounts of the Ultimo company showed it had been making losses and been in financial difficulties, and that in 2013 it had been rescued by a Sri Lankan clothing manufacturer, Mass Holdings. Mr Anderson wrote, Ms Mone is not a successful entrepreneur. She is a small-time businesswoman with a PR exposure far in excess of any actual success. So, William, I'm intrigued to find out what you think about this in relation to, now that we know, hindsight's a good thing, of course, now that we know more about how Michelle Mone behaved during the PPE VIP lens scandal. Is this just confirmation of what many of us have already suspected?
Well, I suspect it's come out by way of trying to sort of underpin the attacks on Michelle Mone, which, in my view, are very likely to be justified. We shall see what transpires. It was certainly, I thought at the time, it was kind of rubbing the Scottish people's face in it a little bit that she got the peerage, because it clearly was a reward for her campaigning against independence that got her the nod from Cameron. It may or may not have brought the honour system into disrepute. There have been far more egregious cases since, particularly with Boris Johnson's resignation honours list. So that would hardly be a surprise either. Interesting, though, that David Mundell's going on about not being consulted. It was the norm for the Scotland Office to be consulted, but it is also the norm for this government not to consult. And it looks like, whoops, they did it again, so to speak. So, yeah, subsequent events would certainly tend to bear out the idea that maybe a peerage was not the best idea. But then I don't think any peerage is a good idea, so I'm more than willing to go along with that view.
Yeah, and I've got two kind of questions rattling around inside my empty skull at the moment. One is that shouldn't Mr. Mundell have said something at the time, perhaps, or would that have been awkward for him? And also, do you think it's telling that Michelle Mone chose the place name Mayfair when she, for her peerage.
Yeah, the most expensive square on the Monopoly board. Good. Yes. David Wandel, I think, was new in the job when she got her period. She was, I think, Secretary of State between, was it 2015 and 2019, and she got her period in 2015. So an anguished squeak from him at that stage might not have been good for his career. I suspect that the statement he's made now possibly is all part of the manoeuvring to undermine Michelle more and more. I do believe that she's going to be made a scapegoat when it comes to talking about PPE, but she's by no means the only one. And I think the others may escape, and I think that may be the game. It's perfectly all right to criticise her, but there's a whole lot to come out. Corruption on both sides, I fear. So we're in the middle of a game at the minute, I think.
Yes. Thank you, William. Sufra O'Leary, the ECHR president, has said that the UK would break international law if it ignored emergency orders from the European Court of Human Rights to stop asylum seekers being flown to Rwanda, the court has said. The head of the ECHR told a press conference there was a clear obligation for member states to take account of Rule 39 orders, interim injunctions issued by the Strasbourg-based court. Although Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has not definitively said he would ignore any ECHR orders, he has said that he won't let a foreign court stop us from getting flights off. It was an order from the ECHR that helped stop initial plans for ministers to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda. O'Leary said there is a clear legal obligation under the European Convention on Human Rights for states to comply with Rule 39 measures. Such injunctions, she added, were only issued in exceptional circumstances where there is a real and imminent risk of irreparable harm. She added, where states have in the past failed to comply with Rule 39 indications, judges have found that the states have violated their obligations under Article 34 of the Convention. Article 34 establishes the right of people or groups to apply to the ECHR for redress if they believe their rights under the Convention have been breached by domestic courts. O'Leary noted that the UK had always complied with Rule 39 measures and had in 2021 urged Russia to abide by a ruling connected to the detained opposition leader Alexei Navalny, a noted opponent of the President Vladimir Putin. Since the ruling, which was based on concern for the safety of those deported, Sunak has announced plans for an undated treaty with Rwanda that adds safeguards, and for the Safety of Rwanda Bill, which in effect seeks to set aside the Supreme Court decision. Both of these plans have experienced trouble. On Monday, the House of Lords voted to delay ratification of the treaty so that more protections could be added. Peers will soon begin considering the Rwanda bill and are expected to seek amendments. William, the juxtaposition with this item and the previous one, I wonder if Michelle Mone is going to take part in any of those debates. That's not my question to you. It's kind of rhetorical. Two things popped into my head there while I was reading that. One is Rishi Sunak's use of language. When he talks about foreign courts, he does of course mean international courts, which the UK government has signed up to agreements with, but he is calling them foreign rather than international. And also, didn't it come out recently that the UK has recently passed or accepted asylum seekers from Rwanda, and yet Rwanda is reminding the UK that it has to do the right thing, and they won't take any asylum seekers if the UK does breach ECHR rules?
It gets more and more complicated, and basically the British government's position right now on Rwanda is to introduce a law that denies reality. And that's never a good idea. I don't think it's ever worked any time it's been done before. So, yes, interesting that you do mention the framing of the court as foreign rather than international, but it has to be remembered also that the UK Supreme Court, not a court I have a great regard for, I've got to say, but nevertheless, the UK Supreme Court, which is not a foreign court, was also against the Rwanda proposals, and we don't yet know how they will react to the new proposals, even if they survive the House of Lords unscathed. So I think this is a shot across the bows from Shifra O'Leary of the ECHR. and it may well be part of the process which eventually leads the UK to leave the ECHR, which would not, in my view, be at all a healthy development. But I think in what I read about this, Ms. O'Leary finishes with one of those sort of perfectly charming but slightly interesting remarks, saying that the UK is blessed with many international legal experts and a very active civil society. So I'm sure this will get a full airing and all that sort of stuff. And that read to me like I'm going to get out the popcorn now and enjoy this. And I hope she does.
Thank you, William. And apologies to Ms. O'Leary if I mispronounced her name at the start of that item. So, scientists at the University of Lorraine, searching for methane in northeast France, unexpectedly discovered a large deposit of natural hydrogen, more than 1,000 metres deep underground. This hydrogen is produced by groundwater reacting with iron-rich minerals, splitting the water into hydrogen, possibly renewing itself almost indefinitely. Hydrogen is often viewed as the wonder fuel of the future that does not give off greenhouse gases when used and which could help replace fossil fuels. However, until now, one major drawback to the development of hydrogen for electricity generation and transport has been because hydrogen production requires a lot of energy to turn either hydrocarbon fossil fuels or water into hydrogen. These processes are still very expensive, and when using fossil fuels, it would also require to be used with carbon capture and storage technology. The discovery in France could be the largest naturally occurring deposit of the gas ever found, possibly 250 million tonnes of hydrogen, enough to meet current global demand for more than 2 years. The challenge is how to transport that gas to where it is needed. Natural hydrogen deposits have been found before, and there is already a small well in western Mali. Larger deposits are thought to exist elsewhere, such as the US, Australia, and some European countries. William, I don't know if, like you, like me, I was kind of transported back to my chemistry classes back in the day at school. But what a stroke of luck for France, eh? That's handy.
Well, yes, it is, and hydrogen is always there in the background as an option. But um, as we have said, the expense under the way things have been, the expense and indeed the need to use either renewables or fossil fuels to free the hydrogen has been a problem. Finding a natural reserve like this, which was, the existence of which with others has been suspected for a while, is a potential game changer. But there's still a long way to go, isn't there? Because yes, we have to get it to where it needs to go, and it needs to go to lots of places. So um, yeah, it's a big thing for France, perhaps, and it could be the start of big things for um, doing our energy in a different way worldwide to come. But let's just wait and see what happens, I think.
Yes, a friend of mine who is an engineer and who knows more about these sort of things than me, he said hydrogen's fine and dandy, but if we do go down that route, then there will be explosions. But my response to him on that was like, well, isn't that the case just now with petrol? I don't know. Have you heard about anything to do with?
One thinks of airships and things like that, and yes, hydrogen does tend to go boom, but I'm I've got to, at some level, have faith in the people working with it to make it as safe as possible, as indeed is the case with petrol in cars right now. But yes, I think there could be some things with that in future.
Yeah, again, I'm remembering back to school days with that pop at the test tube with the lit taper. So I'll move on to the next item. With 2 cases of laboratory confirmed measles since October 2023, one of which was confirmed today, Public Health Scotland, or PHS, is encouraging the public to take up the offer of the measles, mumps and rubella, or MMR vaccine. Anyone who hasn't had 2 doses of the free MMR vaccine, as well as parents and carers of children who have missed a dose, is encouraged to visit the NHS Inform website to find out how to arrange an appointment in their local health board area. Uptake of MMR has declined across all UK nations in recent years, and there remains a risk of infection in those who are not vaccinated or not fully vaccinated for their age. Having 2 doses of the MMR vaccine is the best way to be fully protected against measles. Measles can be a very serious condition, causing pneumonia and encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, and can affect people of any age if they have not been vaccinated. The MMR vaccine protects against measles with the first dose offered to children between 12 to 13 months and the second dose offered at 3 years, 4 months. If it's missed at these times, it can be given at any age. Dr. Sam Gerbervet, head of vaccination and immunisation, said, as measles cases continue to increase across other parts of the UK and Europe, we are working with health boards to ensure that as many people as possible are fully vaccinated with the MMR vaccine. 2 doses are needed to give full protection. Further information on measles and how to check your child is fully protected can be found at www.nhsinform.scot/camp against measles. I'll read that out again, www.nhsinform.scot/CAMP against measles. William, not only is this a serious disease that can cause pneumonia and encephalitis, I think it can also cause death. And I've seen reports link the lower uptake to this to conspiracy theories about the COVID vaccine being something that is going to be controlled by international corporations. And sorry, I'm getting mixed up here, but isn't it fair to say that if you don't get your child vaccinated, then you've compromised herd immunity, and you're going to be actually you could be held responsible for any deaths from people that do catch measles as a result? Forgive my garbled delivery again.
Yeah, well, certainly herd immunity works at 95%. Now, in England and in, I guess, other parts of Europe, perhaps, that 95% is being significantly missed. So that, I think, is what would account for measles rates going up significantly in England and in Europe. And I know that it's been cited as a problem in England, and as so often when there's a problem in England, we look to Scotland and say, let's see how bad it is here, and then all sorts of claims are made. In fact, I think Scotland is doing relatively well, although I can see the cause for concern from Public Health Scotland here. The immunisation rate isn't quite at 95% for 2 doses, which is obviously the optimal protection. It's up at, for 1 dose, it's up at 95.8% by age 5. So that's good. But for 2 doses, it's at 91% for age 6. So there is some way to go just to bridge that gap. Now, in England, the vaccination rates are far less. And part of the reason for that, I suspect, with MMR, not just more recent talk about the COVID vaccine and all sorts of flights of fancy on that one, but MMR was, I think, wrongly associated with the development of autism in the early days. And there was one particular doctor who was at the forefront of that, and he falsified his information. And that, I think, is a lingering problem, perhaps, in people's minds. Not so bad in Scotland, though. We're doing quite well at 91% for the 2 doses, but we need to do more. We had 1 fully confirmed case in 2019, 1 fully confirmed case in 2022, but since October 2023, we've had 2. So that is reason for concern, because we need to maintain the high standards that we've got. So I can see where Public Health Scotland are coming from, and I hope that speaking out in their quarterly report here makes a difference, and we get back up to where we need to be.
Yes, I mean, technically, it's only 2 cases, but technically that's a 100% increase, and we'd rather see it go from 1 to 0, wouldn't we? You sounded quite genned up on this, so I'm just going to quickly ask you another question before we move on. Do you know if you do make sure your vaccinations for measles are up to date, does that protect you from shingles as well if you've had measles before?
No, because shingles is associated with chicken pox.
Oh, right, okay,
So
yes.
measles, mumps, rubella doesn't touch on chicken pox. There is a vaccination for shingles now, which I think older people are getting.
There you go. So even though I was completely off centre, it was worth asking that. Thank you, William. So the next item is a cash first fund which aims to reduce the need for emergency food parcels in food banks will fund 8 partnerships to provide help to low income families. 6 of these will provide new sources of cash first support. An initiative which will support low income families to take part in community action and advise on improvements in local services is being funded as part of a wider programme to help develop new approaches to child poverty. The project, led by Midlothian Sure Start in partnership with Midlothian Council, is one of 9 successful applicants to the Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund, which was set up to explore promising approaches or redesign services to maximise their impact on child poverty. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "These 2 funds exemplify the innovative approach the Scottish Government is taking to tackling poverty and delivering for the people of Scotland." She went on to say the Midlothian Partnership will give local families the opportunity to get involved and influence local services. It will aim to identify improvements which will ensure help is on offer, is joined up, and people are supported in a dignified way to reduce stigma. She said other projects will help to accelerate progress in tackling poverty, including by making it easier for people to access cash in a crisis and by connecting people with advice to prevent future hardship. We are investing £3 billion this financial year to tackle poverty and protect people from the cost of living crisis. We are taking all the action we can to support people within our limited powers and fixed budget. Cash First Fund successful proposals area lead partners are Aberdeen Voluntary Action, TSI Aberdeenshire, Aberdeenshire Council, Edinburgh Health and Social Care Partnership, Fife Council, and I think I'm going to just try and think of a question for you. Just for viewers at home, I'm trying to listen to the voice in my ear which says so the auto cue should read as a table, but it doesn't. So it's difficult to. Yeah, but let's see if I can swap to my printout and see if it's any closer there. Apologies if you can all bear. No, it didn't make any sense at all. So I think we should make the voice in our ear audible to viewers at home. It might.
Getting my popcorn out now.
Here we go. That gives me a chance to do that. I've wanted to do that for a long time. So in Aberdeen, the lead partner is Aberdeen Voluntary Action, TSI. In Aberdeenshire, the lead partner is Aberdeen Council. In Edinburgh, the lead partner is the Edinburgh Health and Social Care Partnership. In Fife, the lead partner is Fife Council. In Glasgow, the lead partner is Glasgow Centre for Population Health. In North Lanarkshire, the lead partner is North Lanarkshire Council. In Orkney, the lead partner is Voluntary Action Orkney, TSI. And in West Dunbartonshire, the lead partner is West Dunbartonshire Council, just to emphasise not Dumbartonshire there. Andrew, so just go straight to you. What would you like to say?
Well, we've got again the key statement which was made by Shirley-Ann Somerville was that it's we're doing what we can with our limited powers, and that's very true. The Scottish Government's been forced to be innovative about what it does, and it's always in a fairly small way. But these are 2 good initiatives: the Child Poverty Practice Accelerator Fund, which is basically involving people in the decisions that are made about them and how local services are for them with regards to reducing poverty. So basically, it's not being done top down so much, and that they've got a voice. That's important, just as a matter of sheer respect. And the Cash First Fund, which is the other initiative, which 8 projects are taking up, which basically makes it easier to access cash in a crisis. So it means you don't have to visit the food bank. And you also have worn into that or sewn into that a means of connecting people with better advice. And that's very important because, again, it gives people agency over what happens to them. And that's the name of the game. So good initiatives, in my view.
Yes, I mean, so from what you're saying, so it's a good example of decentralisation, power being devolved downwards to where it's needed. And it's an interesting point that you make. Some people might be concerned about cash being given to people, but it means that people know what they need to spend the money on, whether it's the gas bill or whether it's food. We can buy bags of pasta and tins of beans, but we don't really know if that's what people really need. So to give them cash, it does empower them, doesn't it?
I think it does empower them, and if there's any risk involved in giving people cash, it's far outweighed by the benefits. Uh, just making life easier and better for people and smoothing the path when they're in difficulty, often through no fault of their own, is a fine and noble thing to do. I wish the UK government thought about it more.
Thank you. So I'll move on to our last item. Just checking. Yes, so the National Theatre of Scotland, the NTS, has announced an exciting new season of work for the coming year, including world premieres, tours, and work at all scales on stages across Scotland, England, and beyond. There will be a programme of work for younger audiences, plus artist residencies, events, a touring exhibition, and film and digital projects. The season includes 4 world premieres, the return of 2 hit shows backed by popular demand, 3 productions at the Edinburgh Festivals, and 9 touring productions, and will see the NTS touring to 45 venues across 28 locations in Scotland, England, and Europe. The NTS Artistic Director, Jackie Wiley, said, "We are delighted to be offering audiences a packed theatrical programme in 2024, with thrilling new productions alongside acclaimed shows that we have brought back by popular demand. We are proud to honour icons and celebrate artists that help define and shape our cultural identity." She went on to say, as Scotland's national theatre company, who tour tirelessly throughout Scotland, we want to bring a sense of community, togetherness, pride in our nation's creativity, and the chance to have a brilliant night out for audiences locally or indeed further afield. We are acutely aware that we continue to live in challenging times. Global politics, the aftermath of the COVID years, and the cost of living crisis all have ongoing impacts for the creative and cultural industries and the brilliant Scottish artists who create theatre with us. She went on to say that National Theatre of Scotland has always held a lens up through which we can view ourselves as a nation, as a society, and never more so than in this programme. Through the sharing of important stories that tell us about ourselves, we explore our shared humanity. Climate activism, youth protest, the enslaved Joseph Knight who made his bid for freedom, the great Billy Connolly, the Margaret Thatcher years, working class culture, teenage cosplay, country music, masculinity, and the late great Belinda Odenyo all share the spotlight in our 2024 programme. She went on to say that young people hold a special place in our programme. We are committed to ensuring they are involved with the National Theatre of Scotland from primary school onwards through our productions with Theatre in Schools Scotland, our touring work to venues, and through participation in projects with leading theatre makers. We thank our partners, our supporters and funders, the venues we are touring to, the artists, the crews and the freelancers who make our work, all those who participate and, most importantly, our audiences who energise us through their commitment and enthusiasm for the joy of theatre. William, we always try to end on a good news Scottish story, and the fact that this seems that the National Theatre of Scotland is even managing to get beyond Brexit Britain into international borders in Europe. I mean, this is really quite something, isn't it?
Well, it's been doing that, I suspect, for a while. But yes, it's Scotland taking its place in the world on the cultural stage. A good story for Burns's 265th birthday, I might add. And so yes, and it's not just elitist stuff. There's a lot of good stuff with, as you say, Theatre in Schools Scotland. There's a Theatre for a Fiver programme for many of their productions. One of the residencies they've got is in North Glasgow with the Neighbourhood Project. So there's all sorts of things going on. Culture is important. It will be important in an independent Scotland, and it will be an important part of in the campaign for independence, telling the story about Scotland. We have to get away from just the politics. The culture is very important as well. So Amongst that is going to be, by the way, Believe in Scotland launching the cultural side of its campaign in Perth on March the 30th, which is the day the Stone of Destiny comes to Perth Museum and the Perth Museum opens up. Not that it has anything to do with the National Theatre of Scotland, but it's the general cultural scene, and I thought I'd get a plug in. You'll be hearing more about that, no doubt. So good stuff. I'm looking forward to Maggie and Me, which is the Damien Barr autobiography adaptation coming to Perth, and no doubt lots of other stuff if I can get round the country and don't get bogged down with my work here.
Yes, and anything that saves people from having to travel to the Central Belt for that culture is good news, certainly. And you're absolutely right. I mean, because usually when times are tough and budgets are strained, the arts and culture is usually the first to suffer. And the First Minister, if I remember rightly, back in the SNP conference, he said he was going to try and increase funding to the arts. So this is. Yeah, the Voice Mayor says by 100 million in 5 years. Is this part of that, or?
No, I think that will remain the goal of the Scottish Government, but it will become increasingly difficult under the current devolution settlement. And again, what we're doing is being innovative and doing the best we can with what we've got. And there's flavours of that in the National Theatre for Scotland's programme too. But on the whole, it's an ambitious programme, and I look forward to it.
Thank you, William. William, we started 7 minutes late, and it's not quite 7 minutes past the hour, so we've got a minute or two. Is there anything that you'd like to that you didn't get to say earlier on, or is there anything that you'd like to say before we go?
I think it's probable that the voice in your ear wants me to read a piece of Burns or something.
Aye.
So I could. We've only got a few minutes, and this is 5 verses long, so I'm going to make it 3 verses, if that's all right. I'm going to cut out 2 of the verses, and if it gets horrible, you can no doubt devise a technical hitch to shut me up.
Not
But
at all. Go for it.
the one I'm going to read is this. Is there for honest poverty that hings his head and all that? The coward slave we pass him by, we dare be poor for all that. For all that, and all that, our toils obscure and all that. The rank is but the guinea's stamp, the man's the gowd for all that. You see yon birkie called a lord, wha struts and stares and all that. Though hundreds worship at his word, he's but a coof for all that. For all that and all that, his ribboned star and all that, the man o' independent mind, he looks and laughs at all that. Then let us pray that come it may as come it will, for all that sense and worth o'er all the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet, for all that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be, for all that.
Thank you, William.
60% of
No,
this
that
is
was
for honest poverty.
no, that was great. I actually had the tune going through my head when you were reciting that. And would you
If I
would you
could
say
hold it in a bucket, I would sing it, but there you are.
would you say that just before we go, would you say that maybe Burns had Michel Mone and David Cameron in mind when he penned that?
Well, you think it's the Brahan Seer now? Probably not. But then again, history is full of the same types recurring in their ways. So certainly, I did deliberately choose the Berkey Lord verse.
Well, thank you, especially this evening, for giving up a good chunk of your time on Burns Night. We really appreciate it. William, and hope to see you again. That is it for this evening. And yes, thank you, William. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. To everyone who has donated to our emergency crowdfunder over the past few weeks, we are now only £2,000 short of our target and very hopeful that we will reach £10,000 by the end of this week. Although the immediate pressure has been eased and we can now focus on securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland, our need to grow our subscriber base and increase our funding is still urgent. So good night on Burns Night. And William, once again, if we can go wide, thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Happy Burns Night, everybody.